What do you think about when you look up at the moon? Perhaps you might be comforted by the seemingly enchanted glow that it provides, or perhaps intrigued by its sometimes mysterious appearance as it fades in and out between the shifting of clouds. If you're like me, you might find the moon to be quite ominous. And while that might sound absurd to some, need I remind you that it's a full moon that is seemingly responsible for the changing of humans into werewolves. That is, if you subscribe to the ideas of common folklore. But perhaps there's some truth to these ideas in the form of one man from history who would lead a double life as a bloodthirsty werewolf who consumed animals, women, and even children. We know him as Peter Stumpp, a farmer from the village of Bedburg, Germany, in the 1500s. He was described as a widower with 2 children, a son and a daughter. He was a man who was met with the utmost respect from his peers and his neighbours. He was well liked in his community and said to be considerate and kind to all those he met. However, according to the legends written about him in a 16-page pamphlet which was published in London in 1590, this was not the type of man you'd want in your neighbourhood at all. In the 1500s, werewolf trials were being spearheaded by mass hysteria, but none of the causes exemplify the phenomenon of werewolves more than Peter Stumpp, the Werewolf of Bedburg. As I mentioned, the primary source from which we know about Peter Stumpp comes from a 16-page pamphlet that was published in 1590. It remained virtually forgotten about until the 1920s, where an occultist known as Montague Summers discovered it, making it public knowledge once more. The pamphlet speaks in great detail about Stumpp's life, including the crimes he was accused of, as well as his gruesome end. He was said to have been born in the mid-1500s in or near Bedburg, possibly in the village of Efrath in Cologne, Germany. While he is referred to as Stumpp, it's been disputed as to whether this was his actual name, given that there have been a variety of spellings over the years. An account has it that his name was actually Abel Griswold, but for the most part, Peter Stumpp is generally accepted as his name, given that his left hand was said to have been cut off. The village of Bedburg was said to have first begun to suspect there was a werewolf skulking about their village when local livestock were found torn apart in the mornings, their guts and innards strewn about them in gory spectacles. It wasn't until women and children began disappearing as well did the villagers begin to make their accusations, particularly when some of the bodies of their neighbours began to turn up, horribly ravaged and mutilated. Why Stumpp came under speculation at all from his neighbours is unknown. However, there have been some explanations provided throughout the years. One idea has it that Stumpp's mistress was said to have been related to him in some way, perhaps a distant relative, but that she was already married to someone else. When her husband found out about her infidelity, he accused both her and Stumpp of being incestuous, which damaged Stumpp's reputation and made him susceptible to come under fire for a range of different rumours. One of these rumours was that Stumpp was the werewolf killing livestock and people around the village, and this, unfortunately for Stumpp, is one that stuck the most. Furthermore, Stumpp was also suspected of having an incestuous relationship with his daughter, and that she would produce him a son. These accusations only fueled the fire of Stumpp's debauchery and made it more plausible for the townsfolk that he could have indeed been the werewolf. Another explanation is that Stumpp was simply accused of being a werewolf because he was a Protestant, and with the increasing popularity of Catholicism, it was a way for the Catholic authorities to persecute him. In all of these accounts, it would become easy for the accusers to point the finger at Stumpp for being a werewolf because he was missing his left hand, and the werewolf in question, according to those who had seen it, had also been missing its left paw. The idea has it that a group of villagers once caught the werewolf in a trap, and that in order to free itself, the werewolf had to bite off its own paw. Seeing as he just so happened to be missing the corresponding hand, Despite having lost his hand in an accident some many years before the rise of the werewolf rumours began at all, he fit the profile, and the accusers would ignore any other shred of logic in order to condemn him. Stumpp was captured in 1589 after he was said to have been tracked down by a group of werewolf hunters. They would chase the werewolf into the woods with the hounds hot on his heels, but somewhere during the pursuit, the werewolf would disappear, and they would find Stumpp in the same area as where they expected to find the werewolf to have gone. It's unclear as to whether they had seen the werewolf transform back into Stumpp, or if Stumpp just had rotten luck and was a horrible casualty of circumstance that he was in the wrong place at the wrong time. But either way, the werewolf hunters had made up their minds. Stumpp was the werewolf. Another idea suggests that while the werewolf hunters may have actually been in pursuit of the werewolf escaped. Tired from the chase and unwilling to spend the time tracking the werewolf again, the werewolf hunters simply shrugged their shoulders and agreed to accuse Stumpp and went back to the town to apprehend him. Regardless of how he came to be captured, Stumpp was said to have been tortured on a rack, which would lead to his eventual confession. Whether or not this confession was legitimate, or whether he was admitting to a false confession to make the pain stop, is obviously unknown. Stumpp would claim that he had been practicing black magic since the age of 12, and that he had made a pact with the devil, who in exchange had granted him a magic belt that allowed him to transform into, and I quote, "the likeness of a greedy, devouring wolf, strong and mighty, with eyes great and large, which in the night sparkled like fire, a mouth great and wide, with most sharp and cruel teeth, a huge body and mighty paws." Stumpp would explain that when he removed the belt, he would transform back into his human form. As you might imagine, the belt was never found, despite a thorough search of his property. Stumpp also confessed to the killing of livestock and the disappearances of those in the town. It was understood that Stumpp began killing small animals and livestock to sate his bloodlust, but that he grew out of control until the only fix to his addiction would come in the form of human consumption. Even more gruesomely, he confessed to eating 14 children and 2 pregnant women, for which he ripped out the fetuses and ate their hearts. One of the 14 children he was said to have murdered was his own son by devouring his brain. Another account has it that before he had met the devil, he had donned the skin of a wolf and gone about hunting his victims with his bare hands. This would seem to denounce the idea that he was a werewolf and instead just a madman. Stumpp would be executed for being a werewolf, and in the most grisly fashion. First he was placed on a wheel, where his flesh was literally torn from his body with scalding hot pincers from the fire. His arms and legs were broken by the pummeling of a blunt axe, before he was beheaded and subsequently burned. Stumpp's mistress and his daughter were also sentenced beside him, and were flayed, strangled, and then burned. After the execution, Stumpp's head was retrieved, and the local authorities proudly displayed it on a pole, along with the torture wheel and the head of a wolf to go with it. Alternatively, some claim that Stumpp's head was sewn to a wolf's body and hung in public. It might seem a touch too far, but such a brutal execution must have worked in dissuading anyone into talking to the devil about becoming a werewolf, because there was never another case like it in Bedburg. In 1587, the Protestants were defeated, and the castle of Bedburg actually became the headquarters of Catholic mercenaries. A Catholic movement began in Bedburg, which would aim to re-establish the Roman faith as the one true faith. Why am I mentioning this? Well, if you remember, Stumpp was a Protestant, so it's not inconceivable that this whole werewolf trial was merely a means to make an example out of the Protestants, and a tactic to scare them into converting. It should be noted that Stumpp's trial actually attracted members of the German aristocracy, something that wasn't really common as far as witch and werewolf trials went. Their attendance would mark the occasion as having some form of significance, whether political or otherwise, It may have been an invitation from the Catholic authorities to demonstrate how effective their methods could be in quelling the Protestant resistance. On the other hand, the outrageousness of Stumpp's crimes may have been enough to warrant the visit from the German nobles, as the sheer scale of his corruption would have likely echoed from region to region. But let me know in the comments below what you thought about Peter Stumpp. Was his trial merely a sham used to suppress the Protestants? Or was he genuinely being trialed for being that bloodthirsty werewolf in which he was accused of? Do you think that he deserved such a gruesome execution, given that he was said to have murdered innocents himself? Or was it a touch overkill? Perhaps you believe that Peter Stumpp was merely a madman dressed up in a wolf's fur, as he killed during his nightly hunts. Or maybe you think that he actually was a werewolf, and that such creatures actually do exist. Let me know your thoughts, and don't forget to like this video and subscribe. Until the next time, guys.